Hello and welcome to a short, hopefully, presentation about my feedback related work at the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, where I spend most of my time, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which one of the two beings in the picture is me, Jamie Emerson. So a couple of years ago, the head of my department at UNNC set up a feedback steering group. The aim of the group is to have a positive impact on our feedback practices, and that is feedback that teachers give to students, that students give to teachers, and it is hoped the feedback that teachers give each other. One of the early projects, or basically the early project, was increased standardization of feedback. That was what our head of department was really keen on. And so, working with a colleague, designed and produced an exam writing practice and feedback booklet where students on our second semester ESAP courses would do exam writing practices, and all their feedback would be collated into one place, a nicely presented, nicely designed booklet. And one of the things that our head was really keen on was this tick box, so that students could refer to it at a glance to see what things they needed to improve on and what the teacher thought of their work. Everybody in the feedback steering group, and basically everyone, the teachers, would like their feedback to be used, and I was particularly keen on making the feedback dialogic. So we included some reflection tasks. So the idea was that the students would complete a pre-task reflection before they started writing in class, and that would ask them to think back to feedback that they'd received previously, as well as posing any questions to the tutor. So that would be the two aspects. The idea of the reflection would be to encourage students to review previous feedback, therefore using the feedback, and the place to pose questions to the tutor was to encourage a dialogue about feedback, to get students or give students the opportunity to have a more active role in directing the feedback that they receive from the tutor. This would be followed up by a reflection that the students would complete after they'd received their feedback, which again was an attempt to encourage students to review the feedback that they'd been given by the teacher, to reflect on it, and hopefully to use it going forwards. So as a way to review this feedback booklet and to see what was working and what wasn't working, and tweak the design, when it was in use, I conducted think-aloud sessions with about 6 teachers who would come in with their marking, with the booklets, and they thought out loud. And if you've ever done a think aloud, they're super interesting, super useful. You basically get people to verbalise what they're doing and what they're thinking as they do something, and they would do that while they were using the booklet to give feedback on student work. And this was a great opportunity for me because I was able to see tutors giving feedback live, and stole from them a lot. So in doing these think-alouds, I picked up the habit of always starting my feedback with like a thank you to the student, saying something like thank you for your work. And if I can say the student's name, I always say like, thank you so-and-so for your work. I also picked up the habit of, when doing written feedback, like handwritten feedback, I use a pencil and a rubber because that's super useful. And also picked up the habit of using a simple code where if there was repeated problems, I would label them with a letter of the alphabet, and then find a little space where I could give some commentary on those errors. Also, one thing that the process brought home to us is how taxing giving feedback is, like how many decisions tutors make, how much cognitive energy, for want of a better word, goes into giving feedback. It's a lot. I also surveyed tutors, so not everybody volunteered for the think-alouds, but I did produce a survey that tutors completed, and in the survey results about the the reflection and the feedback and the dialogic elements of it, I identified sort of three broad categories of tutor: the pessimists, the idealists, and the pragmatists. So, broadly speaking, the pessimists said, I'm best placed to decide what feedback the students need. The dialogic elements don't work. I'll decide. The students are not in the best position to say what they want feedback on, and moreover, they don't want to reflect, they can't reflect. It's a waste of time unless you force them. I think that is a flawed view. I think that it misrepresents other tutors' experiences, because plenty of other tutors said that actually the students use the dialogic elements and use the reflections, so I think that is just not accurate. I also feel like they perhaps missed the point that yes, as a teacher you might be in the best position to analyse a student's writing and say what's wrong with it, but we also want to do something else. We want to encourage students to take ownership of their own learning, and one way that we signal that this is important is by encouraging reflection and encouraging dialogue on feedback. Then there were the idealists who said, oh yeah, for some students it's absolutely great, they use it so well, and some students it doesn't work for at all. I feel like I'm closer to agreeing with these teachers in that I think it is useful. I think that asking students to reflect on feedback is useful. I think that promoting a dialogue between student and teacher on feedback matters is useful, but I don't agree that there's a clear distinction between students who can reflect and who can use the dialogic elements and who can't. I feel like there's a continuum, and I feel like even by saying to a student, what do you think of your feedback, if they don't do anything, at least you've signalled to them that you think that it's worth them doing that. There are also some students who, in their reflections, teachers would say, well, they didn't really reflect, they just basically copied what I'd said in my feedback. And this brings us on to the third group of tutors, which were the pragmatists, or maybe you could call them the realists. And they said, yeah, even if a student has just basically copied your feedback in the reflection bit, at least that's got them to go and look at the feedback. They're more pragmatic about it, that they value the signal that we send by asking students to reflect on feedback and for asking them to engage with us in a bit of dialogue. And they also say that for some students they can really deeply reflect on their work. So I am inclined, full disclosure, to agree with the pragmatists. I also, to experiment further with dialogic feedback, created interactive cover sheets when I was leading the reading, writing and research skills module on last year's pre-sessional course at UNMC. And interactive cover sheets have been around for a while, and at the end of this video there'll be some suggested reading where you can see some more examples from different places. And basically the idea is that when students submit their work, they also complete what sometimes people call a feedback letter or a feedback memo, where they just have the opportunity to pose questions, specific questions about their work to their tutor. You can see my example there in the picture. The idea being that this promotes dialogue, and it promotes students to sort of think critically about their own work and think, what can I ask my tutor about this? What do I want them to focus on in their feedback? For example, on a draft. And to be honest, uptake was pretty low in the pre-sessional. I think a ballpark figure would be a couple of students per class actually wrote something. I feel like this is partly down to promotion by the tutor or lack thereof. I think some tutors didn't know where the interactive cover sheets were. I think some students used a different cover sheet that was floating around the internet instead. But occasionally, now and then, you would see a student who had posed some questions, and I think that they benefited from the opportunity. Also, when I was standardising the feedback the tutors would give on first drafts, basically the tutors were going to give feedback on a first draft of a 1,500 word critical evaluation essay, and to kind of standardise the feedback, or at least get us all roughly on the same page, I led a standardisation session. I also, as one of my slides there says, created about 100 quick mark drag and drop comments for Turnitin. That was painstaking, frankly, and I did that based on reading that I'd done from Dana Ferris. And in Dana Ferris's book, she compares a couple of studies, one done by her and one done by some other people, about what works and what doesn't work in terms of teachers' written commentary on student writing, and I based the quick mark comments on those findings. So I tried to be pretty direct, I tried to be very clear, I tried to use imperatives, and I tried to be specific. So I created the quick mark comments and then encouraged teachers to A, use them if they wanted to, and B, be more specific when they can add more detail to the quick mark comment, and I encouraged them to do that, to be as specific as they could for what feedback they wanted to give the student on their draft. So to follow up from this, I was granted ethical approval to do some research in this area, and I was allowed to collect student work and teachers' comments to see what happened, basically. So 2 tutors out of 9, slightly disappointed with that number, and most of their students volunteered to participate. I was able to collect the first drafts that the students had submitted, the feedback that the tutors gave on those first drafts, and final drafts. And because I could use Turnitin for all this, it was all there electronically and in one place. So I've literally this weekend finished my first cataloguing of all of the comments and all of the students' responses. Picture there shows that I could do with brushing up on some Excel skills because it's a little bit messy, but I understand what it means. And so far, very, very, very preliminary, this is the amount of comments that these essays produced. So you can see that they cluster around, from 30 to about 50 comments per essay. And the 2 tutors that agreed to participate differ a little bit. You can clearly see that one tutor generally does more than the other. There wasn't a guideline, there wasn't a sort of specified amount of comments to give. Tutors were given about an hour per draft though. Generally, students responded to the comments. So I counted a total of nearly 1,000 comments, and 62 were NA, were student did nothing, like just no change at all. Interestingly, only 7 of the nearly 1,000 comments were positive. Again, I hadn't given any clear specification of how many positive comments to give, but this surprised us. It does seem a little low. So my next stage is to look for patterns in what students do and don't respond to. So I'd like to look at the comments that students did nothing with, didn't use to change their essay, and see if they have any things in common. Is it the case that students get put off by certain types of comments or not? I'd be interested to see, and that's what I'm going to look for next.